Let's talk a little bit about leaky gut, what it is, what can cause it, and what it can cause. So, intestinal permeability, also known as leaky gut more colloquially, is a state where the spaces between the cells of the gut increase. So, the intestinal lining is one cell thick, super, super thin, and those cells are joined by certain little proteins and little protein structures. And as those little protein structures break down, the gaps between the cells they increase, so the intestinal barrier becomes more permeable or leaky. So that's what leaky gut really is. Now, these gaps allow undigested bits of food, bacterial toxins, and other particles to get into the bloodstream. Then they shouldn't be there. Once they get into the bloodstream, the immune system will perceive these particles as foreign invaders, so it will start revving up and attacking them. And what this causes is it's a cascade of inflammation and further immune reactivity that can lead to food sensitivities, maldigestion, malabsorption, further damage to the intestinal lining, further leakiness or further permeability, and then it can also cause toxins, bacterial metabolites to enter the bloodstream, and it can also cause autoimmunity if this goes over a certain period of time. So, not a good state to be in. And what we know from the research is that leaky gut is actually quite prevalent in autism. So I have a few studies in my book that have found that anywhere between 26% to 76% of the autistic participants had increased intestinal permeability. So that's between a quarter to 3/4 of the people that were tested had increased intestinal permeability. So pretty high in some cases. And what's interesting is that one of the studies found 37% of the autistic people had abnormally high intestinal permeability. They also found that 25% of their first degree relatives also had high intestinal permeability. So it looked like there's some familial factors at play there. In contrast, the control group's first degree relatives only had 5% leaky gut, right? So it was definitely much higher in the first degree relatives of the autistic group. So there could be some familial factors, so it could be diet or it may be genetics, but it's more likely environmental, so diet, toxic exposures, things like that. Which leads me to the next question is what causes leaky gut in the first place? So things like inflammation, gut infections, these are big contributors to leaky gut. They damage the intestinal lining. Food allergies or sensitivities. So if your child has food allergies that you don't know about or food sensitivities that you've not detected, those foods will cause inflammation, further damage to the gut. Then also certain food additives and gluten can cause increased intestinal permeability. Heavy metals and chemicals can contribute to leaky gut, and even physical and emotional stress can contribute to leaky gut. So there's a lot of factors. So we need to get a grip on those factors, and future episodes will talk at length about how to get a grip on those factors. Here's a quote from one study. Toxic chemicals such as mercury, aluminum, formaldehyde, glutaraldehyde, BPA, artificial food coloring in the environment and in food products and in vaccines or medications have the capacity to break oral tolerance mechanism and increase intestinal permeability. So to very simply break it down, toxins in our environment, in our food and so on, when we ingest them, they have the capacity to reduce our immune system's tolerance to them, and eventually that inflammation and the damage will cause increased leaky gut, right? So the point is we need to work on cleaning up the diet, cleaning up the environment from heavy metals, chemicals, reducing foods that may be causing your child inflammation, so food sensitivities testing, we'll talk about that later, identifying food allergies, and then identifying gut infections. This is super important because it's one of the probably the biggest contributor to gut dysfunction, inflammation, immune dysregulation, and so forth in many autistic kids. So that's a little primer on leaky gut and why it's so important that we address it. There are tests out there that you can use to test your child for leaky gut. I would personally not recommend that you run any of these tests. For me, it seems like an extra added cost it doesn't really help much to inform the protocol in terms of the diet and the supplementation. I would much prefer that money to be invested in something like the organic acids test or a stool test or a food sensitivity test that can actually tell us what could be contributing to the gut dysfunction and the increased leaky gut. So, if you run a stool test or an organic acids test and you see that there's a Clostridia or another bacteria or parasites, or a food sensitivity tells you there's 7 or 8 staple foods that your child eats regularly that are highly reactive, you immediately have some information on what to do. So remove those foods, or get probiotics and some herbs to get rid of the pathogens. Whereas a intestinal permeability test, it just tells us there's permeability. We might as well, if there's gut dysfunction, we might as well just assume there is a level of permeability and start reducing the factors that cause or contribute to the permeability, such as I already mentioned, gluten, food additives, working on the gut infections, removing sensitive foods your child is reactive to, food allergens, gluten, things like that. So that's a little primer on leaky gut, just so you're aware of what it is. It is actually a problem in autism, and many other health complaints and conditions also have a component of leaky gut. Certainly autoimmunity has a component to leaky gut in many, if not most people. So it's important that any misconceptions around leaky gut and it's not a matter of does leaky gut cause autism and things like that. These are extremely controversial and simplistic questions. It's not a matter of does leaky gut exist. We know the science has acknowledged that leaky gut exists, but I don't think we need to be as simplistic as saying this causes that and that. There's never a simple answer. So the important thing is to know that it is an issue in autism. There's a certain likelihood that your child might have leaky gut or a certain degree of leaky gut. We know what causes or contributes to leaky gut, so we need to work on eliminating those factors and identifying the factors that contribute to it. So hope you found this useful, and I'll see you on the next one.